Hello my disciples and welcome back to another episode of Character Cross Section. This time, dear viewer, we'll be talking about the Boiled One from the Boiled One phenomena by Dr. Nowhere. Getting straight into who he is the main antagonist whom the video is named after. Story-wise, he's a mysterious cognito-hazardous demonic entity, one that delivers a dark prophecy. In order to spread his dangerous message, he will hijack television stations, which causes a massive influx of locked-in syndrome or pseudocoma. Appearance-wise, the Boiled One is quite tall, although his height varies depending on what he wants it to be. He is overall lanky and has a humanoid shape, but his head is a raw, crimson-skinned, misshapen mass with a melted appearance, possessing a gaping mouth with many visible teeth and large human-like eyes, along with multiple wiry hair-like appendages jutting out from the head and scalp, some of which are completely straight, others hang down like threads. The rest of his entire body, however, is covered in a black cloak, which is similar spiky appendages to those on his head, albeit they vary in size and sharpness. There is a multi-jointed limb that comes out of his body in a singular scene, and a giant pulsating orifice in his chest. Personality-wise, with what little we see of his actions, the Boiled One, who is also referred to as PHEN-228, is a malicious yet calmly spoken and highly intelligent being that actively targets anyone or thing that comes across his path. Overall, he embodies trauma and malevolence, which has been confirmed by Dr. Nowhere himself, and his primary goal being to target the family of Job Zamperini, who was a POW in World War II. Boiled One relentlessly tortures him psychologically by delivering onto him unholy information and going out of his way to actively stalk him and his family. It's also very clear that the Boiled One intentionally goes out of his way to make people suffer, as the creature actively feeds on the suffering it causes. Regarding the history of the Boiled One, known as FEN-228, very little is known prior to the 2003 August broadcast hijackings. When it comes to the actual events of the video, FEN-228 hijacked a broadcast of a nature documentary in Pennsylvania, appearing in the broadcast to spread his message to the viewers, declaring that the memory of his face would cause a physical manifestation of him in the future when they were asleep in bed, and after awakening they would lose their ability to move entirely, at which point he would continue to watch over them continuously and no one would be able to see him except for his chosen victims. The Apparatus branch, in response to this, cut and destroyed any and all evidence of the hijacking. Hundreds of people after this would go on to experience the creature appearing in their minds, taunting and tormenting them, leaving many immensely disturbed. Many just straight up couldn't get his face out of their heads, and others just straight up continued to hallucinate his voice for days after, one victim even saying that the face was living in his head and feeding on his spine, another recalling the hearing of trumpets before they fell asleep. And eventually, given time, all those who witnessed FEN-228 were left with pseudocomas or locked-in syndrome, which left them completely unable to move their bodies apart from their eyes. And for context, locked-in syndrome, LIS, is caused by damage to the pons, a part of the brain that connects the cerebellum and medulla oblongata, which I don't think I pronounced that properly, but whatever. The one aforementioned victim, Job Zamperini, reported to the investigators that his grandson had taken a photo with the creature next to a small playhouse in the backyard, and we're going to later elaborate that something unholy was with him, and that it was going to hurt the others around him if he was to explain what it was telling him. And during the interview with Zamperini, he expressed that he could hear the sounds of hundreds of people screaming and that he could only see the horribly burnt face of FEN-228, who then proceeds to rise up from under the bed and in front of the window. During the interview, Fen interrupts the broadcast and starts speaking again. He cryptically insists that upon the end times, the viewer is going to hear the laughter of thousands alongside the trumpets playing that end-quote happy sounds, end-quote, as the end-quote scalding blood of life, end-quote, pours down from an opening in the sky. You know, I'm not even going to say like end-quote and end-quote, I'm just going to like put a little pause if it's like a quotation. I'll say if it's quotations if necessary, you get the idea. But anyway, the boiling hot Kool-Aid pours from the sky, and the hijacking is intercepted. The video finally ending with the Apparatus branch informing the user to follow the guidelines at the very beginning of the video and to turn off the TV. Safety procedures at the very beginning being, firstly, to avoid any cognitive contact with FEN-228, including the viewing of its face. Second being, if you can hear unusual things being spoken in tongues, you have to wear earplugs. Open a Bible to Psalm 91:10, I don't know how to pronounce that, and on paper you have to write the following: I can see this paper, I can see my hand. I can't hear the screaming of thousands, I can't hear the feast. I am a moving, breathing human being on planet Earth. After that you have to recite Psalm 91:10, I don't know if it's Psalm or P-Psalms, I don't know how to pronounce that. But anyway, you have to recite it out loud, and if memories or imagery of something unholy persist in your mind, which would be FEN-228, it tells you to pray and contact authorities, which after you'll be administered amnestics. And lastly, upon watching footage of Fen 228, you have to wear blue light glasses and view from a distance of 3 feet or more. And with that, now to get into trivia and background information about the video itself. But actually, yeah, before I get into this, I'm going to declare now that I had to watch a film theory video on this to pick up some extra information, and upon analysing the video myself, I noticed stuff that they missed, even doing extra research to present to you more information. Anyway, getting straight into it, starting with Dr. Nowhere's clarification, the Boiled One is not supposed to be Watabe himself, Watabe being the Japanese war criminal who is referenced in the video, and Job is not supposed to be Lewis. Instead, this is supposed to be symbolic of the real-life dynamic between Watabe and Lewis, Lewis being a victim of Watabe's brutality in the POW camps of World War II. And furthermore, in elaboration to this, Dr. Nowhere himself has confirmed the conclusion from the film theorists, being that the Boiled One is a being which symbolises the cycles of trauma, pain, PTSD, hopelessness, and finally apocalypse. He also confirmed that one of the core messages of the video was that through faith and perseverance, the human spirit could fight against these concepts if it truly wanted to. But yeah, now that clarification out of the way, now to get into the actually interesting side information. First major trivia theme we're going to be going over is the Boiled One's ties to religion as a topic. The first notable aspect of this is the trumpets being likely symbolism of the 7 trumpets from the Book of Revelations. In relation to this, we're going to be pushing the glass trumpet aside for a moment, because it's not particularly related to the video, albeit it will be mentioned once later. The second thing being that prayers counteract the Boiled One's mimetic abilities, so does erasing the memory, albeit those who take amnestics to erase it and quote may appear to lead a normal life afterwards, which is not exactly elaborated on by the film theorists or even the video itself in any capacity at all, but it makes you suspect that there may be lingering symptoms after, possibly even flashbacks, which may cause the Boiled One phenomena to reawaken in the future. A third aspect that the film theorists also pointed out is that blood pouring from the sky is probably related to the visions of Apocalypse from Revelations, the whole 7 trumpets, 7 angels, 7 disasters, one being a third of the ocean turning to blood, one burning a third of the planet's trees. And while I can see the blood raining from the sky and Tree of Heaven connection, this feels like a stretch on film theory's part, albeit I can see why they would make the connection. Also, that blood coming out of the sky clearly being on camera footage from the movement implies that the event is actually physically happening, albeit it has very little impact on the story and we don't see anyone get affected by this directly, so it doesn't really do anything. The fourth thing being the Ebrata branch, who suppressed the phenomena, being named after a real group based in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, named the Ebrata Cloister, which is near where the glass trumpet was found, albeit this trumpet has no involvement with the plot whatsoever. Like, it's a nice little thematic detail that I guess fits with the theme of like apocalypse and religion and stuff, especially with the location it was found in, albeit it doesn't really mean anything. But anyway, to avoid getting sidetracked, now to move on. When the Boiled One says nobody but me and you to Job, who is paralyzed, I don't think Job is being related to the Bible's Book of Job as claimed by the film theories, but I'm gonna be honest, that feels like quite a stretch. As to why I feel it's a stretch, this is because the Book of Job is found in the first of the poetic books in the Old Testament of the Christian Bible, and is not at the end among Revelations, as Revelations is not in the Old Testament. For further context, Revelations is the last book of the Bible. It is the 27th book of the New Testament and the 66th book of the Bible, and is absent from the Old Testament as mentioned. The Book of Job, on the other hand, is accepted as canon by Christianity in the Old Testament. And in the New Testament, which has Revelations, Job appears only once, the Epistle of James 5:11, which briefly paraphrases Job as an example of patience in suffering. On a related note to this, Psalm 91:10, which is referenced in the video's instructions, is in the Old Testament and not the new one, but is also found in the King James Version among others. All of this being if my 6 to 7 hours or more of research are correct, but in summary, Revelations is exclusive to New Testament, Job is exclusive to the Old Testament and briefly cameos in the new one via paraphrasing, and Psalm 91:10 is Old Testament among other versions. And yes, while the Book of Job is about a man's faith in the face of adversity, which very much fits with the theme of the Boiled One, it has no real connection beyond the subtext and the character's name, and in all honesty sort of conflicts with Revelations as a recurring theme, which makes me suspect that perhaps Dr. Nowhere used multiple versions of the Bible and couldn't stick to a single version, or maybe just looked them up and just used them without referring to which version they came from. But I can still see the connection, although I just think it's a bit of a stretch. And with the religious aspect over, now to move on to the next part, that being something film theory skimmed over, and that being the blatant birth symbolism. Towards the end, the text, "The miracle of birth, a fetal fanfare," is shown. When you combine this with the blood from the sky and the pulsating chest or stomach the creature has, these could all be symbolic of pregnancy or birth, which only magnifies when an arm forces its way out of the boiled one's side, which when you factor in the pulsating abdomen and the strange noises it makes, this could all very much be something being birthed from the creature's body, which would make sense considering the context it's being presented in. But in addendum to this, if you take into extra consideration its apocalyptic themes and demonic nature, what's coming out of it could potentially be the Antichrist and bringer of Armageddon, which the boiled one was foretelling of, albeit this could also in itself be symbolic for the damage the boiled one is trying to bring. And with that, now to move on to notes regarding the creature's abilities. Firstly, the phrasing, "a manifestation of my being," implies a singular manifestation but more exists at a singular time, so when someone is paralyzed they're only seeing one manifestation out of multiple, which shows the boiled one is not a singular entity in any singular place. It has the ability to display live feeds of hospitals and other rooms, which implies it has a vast reach, and has the ability to see other locations by an unknown mechanism. Next, its ability to cause neurological damage directly, resulting in the pseudocomas, implies that it has a physical way of affecting the victims by some means. Personally, I theorize the boiled one is capable of inducing neural overload in the base of the brain, basically causing the spinal cord to burn itself out, paralyzing the victim. Next, it's capable of spreading via hijacked broadcasts, which means someone or something somewhere would need to have a way to access the internal servers and systems of whatever service is going to be carrying out the broadcasts, and would be injecting the altered mimetic hazard carrying media into the service live. It also appearing out of nowhere means it wasn't scheduled, it's actively being injected into a live feed, either atop a random episode rerun, or the episode rerun had the cognito hazard baked in and was put in live. Next, its voice being heard by those who watch the broadcast, being able to be blocked by earplugs, implies that the sound is being physically generated, and isn't just in the victims' heads. And lastly, while the boiled one can only be seen by those who he wants to see him, he can be captured on cameras regardless, being caught on camera multiple times. This basically means there is something physically there that can be captured by the camera. And with those covered, now we're just going to run through some odd notes that I have. Poison oak misidentification as a tree of heaven, which is an invasive species. This is possibly symbolic as film theory claims, it relating to the boiled one's invasive nature and how it grows the more people it torments. And while I can see this making sense on the surface, and it does honestly sound like a really cool idea, the tree of heaven is not native to Japan, it comes from China and Taiwan as they themselves said, and it had to be artificially brought into the country. And for context, Watanabe was in Japan because Japan in World War II was part of the Axis forces with Germany and Italy. So overall the connection's actually pretty weak when you look into the details. But I will admit it would have been really cool if this was more solid. But yeah, moving on. The rest of these odd notes come from the plush sales video, but I do think that may be potentially canon, so we're going to be covering these. Off-threat human meat briefly appears in the plush video, which implies this creature has a taste for human flesh if the video is canon. The area on its abdomen is referred to as its stomach cavity in the same video, that being the same area we see pulsating during the fetal fanfare scene. Its pilot's license was suspended in 1962, which would be after World War II. Albeit this is probably a joke with no law significance, but if this is canon then it must have done something to get its license revoked. And we know this because pilot licenses don't expire. Next up, symptoms of owning the plushie are similar to witnessing and suffering effects from the being itself, albeit some of the symptoms that show up on the list are either tied to Dr. Nowhere's other works or are just jokes. Next up, the plushie towards the end says, "Release me from this prison of fabric," in reverse, which implies the being is now contained within the plushie if this video is canon.
Release me from this prison of fabric.
And lastly on this list, the final frame of the plushie video says the man's name was, but cuts off, along with a black shape of what is possibly the boiled one or some other entity being shown. And with that, now we can summarize what the boiled one is. At its core, the boiled one is a demonic being which symbolizes the cycles of trauma, pain, PTSD, hopelessness, and finally apocalypse, albeit in a context that I think is likely personal and not global. Essentially, the boiled one represents how trauma can absolutely destroy a person's life in a personal apocalypse. Although, as Dr. Nowhere said, through faith and perseverance and the human spirit, you can get through it. That and has a bunch of demonic power fuckery going on. But yeah, with that we can end the video. It is 10:30 at night. I ain't gonna go to bed. Good night.